The chess world has a new superstar with the name of Nodirbek Abdusattorov from Uzbekistan. He's only 19 years old and already a world champion and a future world champion. Well, who's Nodirbek Abdusattorov? He managed to win last week the Prague Masters tournament with 6.5 points out of 9 games, 1.5 point more than his nearest rivals. Very impressive performance, winning 15 rating points, which makes him world's number 4 with a current live rating of 27.65. Very impressive. Only 19 years old, number 4 in the world, behind Magnus Carlsen, Fabiano Caruana and Hikaru Nakamura. Unfortunately for him, he is not enabled to play in the candidates tournament in this cycle, but definitely we will hear more from him in the near future. He is doing fantastic this year. 2024 is his year, sharing for first in the Tata Steel Chess Masters in Wijk aan Zee earlier in January, and now in Prague winning this event. It's very impressive what the young kid, only 19 years old, has been doing lately, but it's not a complete surprise. In this video, I would like to show you a game he played back in 2021 at the World Rapid Championships in Warsaw. And he's playing with the white pieces against Magnus Carlsen. And that's a very big game. Maybe you have seen the game already, but anyway, this is a real fighting game and very typical for his playing style. Well, just let's dive straight into the action. I will show you what happened. Abdusattorov playing with the white pieces. 1c4. English opening, knight f6, knight c3, e5, knight f3, knight c6. It's the 4 knights variation, and Abdusattorov likes this move e4. He has tremendous success with this system. It's not the refutation or winning recipe against the English, but it's typical for his style. He just wants to get a playable position. He's not the strongest opening theoretician, but he's a real fighter. He just wants to get the playable position, and he will work with that. Bishop b4 was played by Magnus. d3, d6, a3. Typical for real fighters. They want to create an imbalance in the structure. If you do take on c3, the b pawn recaptures, and that strengthens the center and gives white control over the weak d4 square. So bishop c5 is the main theoretical continuation. b4, bishop b6, knight a4. And once again, you're looking for an imbalance. So white is now intending to trade off the knight for the bishop himself. Bishop to g4, knight takes b6, a takes b6, and the bishop goes to b2, guarding that d4 square. Now, Magnus is also a real fighter, so this is a really great clash, of course. Look what Magnus is doing here. He trades off voluntarily the bishop for the knight in order to gain control over the d4 square. So here we have this clash of 2 bishops versus 2 knights, but the position is relatively close. Black is not doing badly here at all. Knight e7, interesting idea. So perhaps this knight want to get rerouted via f8 to e6 to gain control over that d4 square. Well, first white goes for g3, and now the move queen f6. Magnus likes clarity. He wants to exchange queens. But we will see the queens, they will stay on the board for a very long time in this game. And Abdusattorov avoids this exchange. Goes back with the queen to d1. And after knight f8, black is ready to come in with a knight to e6. There are a lot of interesting options, including the very sharp move f4 to pin the pawn on e5. Was not played in the game. Abdusattorov played bishop g2. He wanted to complete his development first, castling kingside. But here, black goes for the move g5, and it's no longer possible to get in this move f4. Bishop goes to h3. Maybe this was not the right plan to place the bishop on g2. Could have gone straight away to h3 with the idea to trade it off for the knight. Well, Magnus seizes the initiative with the move h5. White captures on e6. Queen takes e6, and now white kicks the knight away from c6 with the move b5. And now the knight goes back to b8. And now you may think this is not what you would like to do as black, but very soon the knight will try to get back into the game, and the c5 square is a great spot for the knight. White opens up the position with the move f4. Once again, the e-pawn cannot go away. It will hang the rook on h8. G takes f4, g takes f4. The g-file is open, but black also still needs a couple of moves to bring the king into safety. Knight d7, and white places the king in the corner, absolutely safe. And here again, Magnus offers the exchange of queens. He wants to trade off queens, and that will open up the h-file, does give black some possibilities, perhaps to come in with the rook to h3, to hit the pawn on d3. And here Abdusattorov says, okay, you can trade off my queens, but I'm deciding under which circumstances. If you do take now, the rook will become active, the other rook can come in to f1 or g1, and there's pressure against the pawn on e5. This time Magnus didn't take. He played f6, trying to set up a block against this bishop on b2. Queen e3, avoiding the exchange. Castling queenside, and now a very interesting moment. f5 is played to close the position, trying to trap the queen. But here, okay, black goes h4, rook g1. White is gaining control over the g-file. The rook comes in, black offers the exchange of rooks, but the other rook comes in as well. Here, black decides to take. Very interesting. How to recapture? Well, if you do take with the rook, then you gotta think about moves like queen d1. So that's perhaps not very attractive. Therefore, white decides to take with the pawn, creating a passed pawn, but the pawn is not so strong. Rook g8. Black is intending to wrap it up. And well, how to deal with that pawn? Well, not easy to say. Maybe something like queen h3 to pin the knight on d7. But it's not very convincing at all. In any case, white played here g7. And well, this pawn, it's not really getting further. Black has simple ideas here to wrap up the pawn. But the question is how to do that. I mean, there are still a lot of ideas. For instance, to get a knight to c5, to keep an eye on the pawn on d3 so that the queen is not able to move. You can put a queen on f7 or maybe on h7. In any case, queen h7 was played here immediately. But now, queen to h3. That's interesting move. So that after this move, the knight on d7 is pinned. And after taking on g7, white at least gets the h-pawn. It's a passed pawn. Okay, the pawn is still far away, but who knows? Maybe at some point on a good day, knight c5. Black attacks the pawn on d3. We have an endgame. Queen and knight versus queen and bishop. Knight is not doing bad here at all. Bishop doesn't have much to do, so it tries to get rerouted. If you do take on d3, note there is this move, queen h3, with a double attack. So the pawn is poisoned, cannot be taken. Black played the move c6. Pawn takes, queen h3, check. And defending the pawn at the same time. King b7, queen f3, centralizing the queen. And also the bishop. And then hopefully, as I said, at some point the pawn can come up to h6. But black stops the pawn here with the move queen h7. Bishop d2. King a6. It's a slow game. You see that both sides are trying to improve their position. And who knows who is better here? No idea. Anything can happen in this endgame. King g2. Queen g7. King f1. White brings the king to the center. Queen h7. And now h3. It's just one step. It's protected now by the queen. And here, d5 played. Black is breaking up the center, especially the pawn on e4 is challenged now, and the pawn on d3 is indirectly hit by the queen and the knight. Queen f5. Of course, white would love to exchange queens here, because then the h-pawn is out of reach. So here, black has to keep queens on the board. Pawn takes d5. Pawn takes d5. E takes d5. Queen takes d5. And here you see the queen is active, hitting the pawn on d3. Maybe queen h1 is there. But the king goes first to e2 to guard that pawn on d3. And what is happening here? I mean, you can, of course, give a check on g2. Then the king can go back. Let's say queen g2, king d1. You can go queen d5. You can go back. It's maybe a repetition of moves. Maybe you're just sacrificing the d-pawn and play a move like h4. Super difficult. And don't forget, it's a rapid game. It's a short time control. Instead, Magnus is not going for this repetition. Play the move king b5. He's activating the king. Bishop e3, queen g2. Now the bishop blocks on f2. King a4. The king is used very efficiently intending to take the pawn on a3. White goes h4. The pawn goes one square further. e4. Now the center is opened once again. D takes e4. Knight takes e4. With a threat to give a knight fork on g3. Attacking the queen and the king as the bishop on f2 is pinned. Therefore queen f3 is played. Once again, white is aiming for the exchange of queens. But queen g6 is played. h5, attacking the queen. The queen goes back. And here, very remarkable moment in the game as white moved the bishop to e3, wanted to stop any sort of unpleasant discovered checks on e3, on the e-file, sorry. But with the move bishop e3, you're preparing this move. But it does allow this idea to take on h5, eliminating that passed pawn. Missed opportunity by both players. Idea is that after queen takes knight g3, you can take on h5, you take on b6, king takes a3, and very soon the remaining pawn will be eliminated as well. This is going to end in a draw. Instead of bishop e3, maybe h6 could have been played. There's no good discovered check. For instance, knight g5, queen e3. You're blocking the check. The pawn on h6 remains on the board. Very tricky endgame still. Bishop e3. Let's see what happened. Instead of queen takes h5, f5 was played. But now the pawn gets closer and closer to the other side of the board. Queen to e5, king f1. Trying to get out of any annoying checks. Queen d5, threatening knight d2, winning the queen. So king goes to g2, queen g8, king h3. The king is all the way back now, hiding on the h-file against any potential checks. Still a lot of possibilities. I like queen g6. Looks like a very nice centralizing move. But instead, Magnus wanted to force the issue here. With the move knight g5, I doubt it was a good practical decision. But under time pressure, these moves are easily made, of course. You are attacking the king and the queen. So white is obliged to take here. We have a queen endgame. Queen c6 check. King takes the pawn. And, well, if you do take on b6, well, there is f4. And you gotta watch out not getting checkmated here yourself. It's still a draw. I mean, white has a bunch of checks. That's obvious. But queen c3 was played. This is what I like about Abdusattorov. He's not trying to make a draw against the world champion. He is trying to grind and look for new possibilities in any position. Look what's happening here. King a4, queen c4, king a5, queen c3, king a4. Now we see why the queen went to c3. Because he goes queen g7, offering the exchange of queens. He's a pawn down, but the queens cannot be exchanged here. After recapturing, white is just much faster. So black got to keep. Queens on the board. Queen e3. King h4. And, well, super sharp endgame. I mean, you know this rule in endgames that one pawn is running faster than two. And that's the case here. White's pawn is just closer to the other side of the board. I mean, very difficult endgame. And even with engines, I would probably not understand what's going on. What I know is going on here is that after this move f4, black is in some sort of trouble, because after the move queen d7 check, black places the pawn on b5, but now the pawn goes to h7. It's nicely defended, and any sort of check is not going to help black here at all. The king is about to run away. But note, of course, that at this point, h8 queen is a serious threat. Queen e5 played here, which apparently is a losing move if white plays the move queen d1, but don't ask me why this is exactly the case. Very complicated line. Instead, king to g4 is played. In fact, a very logical move to stay close to this pawn and be able to wrap up the pawn anytime soon. If this queen is ever going to give a check, you can just take the pawn. Therefore, Magnus felt, okay, I better give the pawn away immediately with the move f3. So white captured. So now there are much more checks available. It's much harder for white to find a place to hide. But after queen f6, king e4, queen h4, king d5, queen h5, king c6, the king is now running into the other corner where it's making use of this b pawn. King c7, queen g3, king b7, queen f3, king a6. Now you're even intending to take the pawn on b5. Queen f6, king a7, queen f2, king b7. Black is trying to make a draw here, but things are not simple. Queen c6, blocking the check, threatening to promote a pawn. Queen f7, queen c7, now blocking on c7. Queen f3, king a6. Now, there's not that many good checks available. If you go to f6, it's queen b6 and everything is blocked. You're threatening to take on b5, so queen a8 only move, king b6. The checks are over. But black goes into the corner with the queen. Fantastic defensive resource. Queen c2 check, king a3, queen d3 check, king a2. And if you do take the pawn, well, there will follow probably a bunch of checks and it should be a draw, normally speaking. But who knows what's happening. Now you see that with the queen on d3, the pawn on h7 has been secured. But I love this fantastic idea by Abdusattorov. He played his move, king c5. He is such a trickster because look, he is ignoring the pawn. And Magnus, like what he did earlier in the game, he wants to get rid of his remaining pawn. It will make the process of giving a perpetual much simpler. He should have gone here for queen c8. King takes pawn at some point and then queen b7. It should probably be a draw, but white will try forever and ever. So Magnus instead played here the move b4. It's the decisive mistake because there is queen d2 check. Very important move. And now another huge blunder, but the position is lost anyway. King a1 was played in the game, but there is queen d4 check. You do force the exchange of queens. And after taking, you can play b3, h8 queen. It's b2, but with a knight's pawn, you're never going to save it. In fact, it's just made in 3 moves. After queen a8 check, king b1, king c3, the only move for the king is king c1 and checkmate on h1. So after this move, queen d4, here Magnus just resigned. And that helped Abdusattorov to win his first World Rapid Championships at the age of only 17. This is what he did 2.5 years ago. Very, very impressive. And we knew already then that he is a star to become. But unfortunately, he will not become a new World Championship challenger this cycle. But very likely, very soon he will become one. Well, let me just show you at the end that king a1 is just a big mistake. But if you go to a3 or b3, let's say king b3, you take on b4 with check. The pawn can be saved again. White will try to force the exchange of queens or at least try to promote the pawn very soon. So this is also technically winning. Now white is having the initiative. And also if you do play king b1, you also capture on b4 with check. Well, very impressive game by this young Abdusattorov. Now you know much better who this little kid. He's not little anymore. He's a very sportive guy, 19 years old, in good shape, and ready to challenge the World Championship title. Well, thanks for watching this video. Do you like this video? Make sure to subscribe to the channel, and I will cover many more interesting chess players on this channel.